Well, there are many ways that I could present, that I could introduce the host of this event. I could say that he's president of one of the largest groups of communication of Brazil at 41 years old, such a young man. He has an MBA from Howard University. He's a father of 3 beautiful sons. But truthfully, the invitation to Eduardo Sirotes to be a host of this international section, it was made because he represents better than anybody else the spirit and the concept of social good. Eduardo believes that innovation is the only way to stay relevant as individuals, as companies, or as social organizations. And we always need to invest, and invest a lot in people, because they are the driving force of innovation in any part of human life. So with this sync of concept, spirit, belief and practice, we have the honor to bring Eduardo here with us. And of course, for the generosity, he took our invitation. So Eduardo, please.
Bom dia a todos.
Morning, everyone. I think focus on me. I want to say good morning to you all. Thank Lucia very much for your kind words. And I'm so glad that, in a way, our group is perceived, as you said, because it's true. I represent this today, but it's been practiced for over 50 to 56 years, precisely. So I want to say good morning to everybody. Good morning to everybody that is watching us online with this possibility of the technologies. I was checking the Twitter. So many people, even acquaintances of mine that are tweeting and participating, even though they are not here. We have roughly 200 people, but we have thousands of people that compose this network for good. And this is a network for good. Social good, it is a network for good. And I'm glad to be invited. I'm very honored and very proud on behalf of Grupo RBS to introduce this international participation that we have here. I firmly believe, it is my belief and of RBS Group as a whole, that there are 2 dimensions that can guarantee success of an entrepreneurial project and a personal project. Whatever the dimension of this project, it might be a large company, a small company, an association, an entity, and these 2 dimensions are, to me, are centered in innovation and social vision. I do not know a successful project long term that do not have in its DNA and its daily practice a search around the innovation with a social view. When we work at RBS, every day we think about how to include and to practice innovation around growth and the success of the entrepreneurial project, but also considering the social environment. What is the impact on the social environment? I want to tell you a story, a very quick story, because I have a short time. I have a clock here. I get nervous around it. I just returned a few days ago from an event at Arizona in the US, in Phoenix. I was invited to an event that is called Zeitgeist, an innovation-focused event from Google. It is about innovation. Any movement that is relevant and has an impact is dealt with over there. There are many lectures, many speakings that are very short, 20 minutes at most, where famous people, successful people in every field, political, economic, and social, but also average people such as us that practice on their daily life innovation. And I repeat and reinforce to you my experience over there. I think that those projects that are successful, they contemplate the dimension of innovation, because that was the theme of the event, but also with a social aspect that is very robust in the project. We saw over there transformations that were fantastic in the microcredit program, for example, how to include financially communities that do not have access to credit, how to include communities in the labor market that would not have conditions to be inserted in the market without the technology, how to educate kids in Africa that are starving and that need education to develop, everything through the scope of innovation and technology. So I have a great motivation to talk about this and to represent it. I brought to you, I have a short time, so I brought in a sheet of paper here so I do not take too much of Kriss's time. So I want to say to you how we apply this practically in our daily life in RBS Group. First of all, we have a social engagement, a history of social engagement that is great. It is in our DNA, and in this DNA of social vision and social engagement, it was passed forth through the company. So I would say that we have in a very concrete manner our own foundation. We have today many people that participated in the foundation. We have Lúcia Hitsu, that is the director of the foundation, Maurício Tirots. Temos Nick Suzuki. We have Nick Suzuki of the RBS Group that participates of the foundation. In the foundation, we have Marina Sirots, my cousin, also from the third generation of the Sirots family. She's an advisor. Lúcia herself, that was so kind to invite me here, she is part of our board. And Mozart Neves is also here. He's a member of the board of the foundation. I think I haven't forgotten anybody. And Pedro Sirotsky, that besides being an advisor, he's also an advisor for RBS and a shareholder for RBS. So this participation, this involvement materializes our belief in a very pragmatic manner. But we also have a few premises in our entrepreneurial project that are not restricted to the foundation. They are part of the premises of our daily life in the entrepreneurial project of RBS Group. First of all, it's about people. We can achieve anything without people. It is a #1 priority for any leader to guarantee and ensure that in the professional environment we have the very best people, and these people should be in the right places. And when I say the best people, not only technical skills, but also the values should be aligned, that to guarantee that this very broad component of social vision, to commit to a positive change, should be a part of daily life for everybody. The entrepreneurial culture is essential so we can attract the best people, and to ensure that these people will give their best, they need to have an entrepreneurial culture that brings them in so people can develop and grow. An entrepreneurial culture that represents practically the values that were cited here before. We need leadership in any environment, any group, any nation, but also in Brazil we really need leadership. We have to stop outsourcing problems and to say that problem is for this person or the government. We need to have to do our part, and everybody does their own part with leadership, with capacity of execution.
I think what's being done here now today is a concrete leadership movement. It is not enough to have the best people and have the best strategies and the best entrepreneur strategy and culture if we don't do it. The world is of people who do it, and the people that were here a while ago are people who fulfill things, people who do things. The fact that you face traffic, last night we had a very rainy night. The traffic today was really, really bad, but we're not going to not come here. This is doing stuff. This is having the capacity of fulfilling things. And Francois was saying that the power and the strength is not in information, because information is there for whoever wants it. The strength is in the power of fulfilling things and realizing things. And finally, this is a theme that we're passionate about, which is innovation, which is our fifth premise. And innovation needs to be the matrix, the creation matrix of any company. We need to innovate completely. If we are concerned about our clients, if we're concerned about our public, if we respect our market, and if we have a long-term vision and a permanent search for being relevant as a social agent, we need to think about innovation. We need to practice this innovation. And when I think about innovation, I don't think about it in a very restrictive way, innovating a product or innovating a process. This is also important, but the sustainable innovation that guarantees our future and that guarantees 2030 is the inclusive innovation. It is the transformation innovation. It's the innovation that guarantees that more and more people are going to be benefited by breaking a paradigm and changing a process that is going to benefit a society and it's going to benefit a community rather than a company or a group of clients. I have the honor of introducing this, making this little introduction about a theme that makes me emotional and try to heat up a little bit our debate. And I'm going to call. Do I have to call Kriss? Okay, just I wasn't that sure. And I'm gonna call to the stage Kriss Deiglmeier. Kriss Deiglmeier is the director of the Innovation Center, Social Innovation Center of Stanford University. She has been there for more than 20 years, and she is a very curious person that has this transformational vision, and she's going to talk about her concepts in the next hour, and she's going to make her participation in our seminar. Welcome, Kriss.
Because we're about technology these days. So what I would like before I start is if everybody could stand up, because one of the things we know is sitting is bad for us for too long. So just stand up, take a breath, and I'm going to set all this stuff down, and then I'm going to come back and start the talk. Okay. We can sit down now. You've got some oxygen. You're going to stay awake. And we're going to talk about social innovation. So I'm honored to be here. This is my first visit to Brazil, but it is not my first awareness of all the social innovation going on in Brazil. So I can guarantee you the social innovators, the roles of company, the innovative work of your NGOs is spreading across the world, and that's very exciting. I'm also excited to be here with the foundation to talk about the role of technology to drive social innovation. Being from Silicon Valley, I have a few technology companies in my backyard, and it does seem like it is a little bit in the DNA there. So that's also kind of exciting to be here and sharing, again, across continents, the role of technology. So we've got some big problems to solve in the world. And as Einstein stated, the problems that we have created will not be solved using the same thinking. We need new thinking, new ideas, and the ability to deliver on those ideas to address the world's global problems. And that's what we think social innovation is all about. And what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be doing 4 things. First off, I'm going to talk about what is social innovation. Because if we want to be able to deliver on something, we need a definition and we need to know what we're talking about. And I'm going to frame it more in contrast to social entrepreneurship. Both are valuable constructs, but they are different. And so how we approach them needs to be different. So first I'm going to define social innovation to get us all on the same page. Then secondly, I'm going to use a case study of microfinance, which I know the majority of the room is familiar with what it is, but to go through of how did that social innovation get to scale. We studied about 20 social innovations in the past 30 years to try to understand what were the driving forces that led it to be successful, and what were the things that held it back. So we're going to use that case study to understand a social innovation in more depth. The third piece I'm going to do is highlight an example of then how did technology come to play on a social innovation like microfinance that helped it get to scale. And again, delving into the lessons of what worked and what didn't. And then I'm going to wrap up today talking about 3 things that we believe are important to drive social innovations forward. And then we're going to open it up for questions, which I'm excited about. I was at a small meeting yesterday, and I got really, really hard questions. So I anticipate that'll be similar today. Okay, see, I knew, oh, here it is. Another piece of technology. Okay, here is the world we live in today. Social innovation, social enterprise, social capital, impact investing. Through the 90s and early 2000s, what seemed to happen is throw the word social in front of a business term and think we would get positive change. Well, that's not the case. You have to do more than throw social in front of something to drive change. So let's start with the construct that is most well known in the world right now, social entrepreneurship. And we know many of these people, Mohammed Yunus, we've got people from Brazil, we have people from the Middle East. Social entrepreneurs have been delivering value and new ideas around the world for many years now, and that's a really positive thing. So what characterizes a social entrepreneur? So I tend to like to use Greg Deese. He's a professor at Duke in the United States and has been studying social entrepreneurs for 25 years. They create and sustain social value. They pursue new opportunities, continuous innovation. They don't just innovate once, they innovate all the time. And this is a characteristic that is really important. They act boldly. And lastly, with a heightened sense of accountability. So those are what have been studied about the characteristics of a social entrepreneur. It's important to realize those are really talking about a person, right? They're about characteristics of that individual. So now let's take a look at social innovations. Microfinance, emissions trading, many people know it as cap and trade. Charter schools, which are often privately run towards a public system. Social responsible investing, it's been around for a long time. And many of us, and I'm sure here in Brazil, are familiar with fair trade, whether it be coffee, tea, and products right now. I'm assuming the distinction between social entrepreneurship and social innovation is not yet clear. So I tend to like props. So let's use this stool to help us get clearer on this definition. So on one leg of the stool, we have the social entrepreneur. But as I noted before in the definition, it's based on the great man or woman theory. How do we create more of those men and women to drive those social entrepreneur ideas forward? On the second leg of the stool, as you noticed in my first slide, it talked about social enterprise, which that field of study tends to look at the organization. How do you build teams? How do you deliver strategy? How do you grow that organization? Again, a very positive thing. The middle leg of the stool is what's the capital, the social capital that is allowing all of this to happen. 3 legs of a stool that are about the actual social innovation, which is microfinance. And so when we look at social innovations, it's the idea that we need to look at. So what's important about that is the idea is a systems problem. It's not about an individual. It's not just about an organization. It's about all those pieces together. It's about all those pieces working with government, working with business, and working with civil society. So to understand how to grow and deliver social innovations, you need to be looking at it from a systems level. So this is the definition that we've come up with at Stanford. We like it, and it seems to be getting some traction. So it's a novel solution to a social problem that's more effective, efficient, or sustainable than existing solutions, and for which the value created accrues primarily to society rather than private individuals. And so I think that a couple things to really hone in on here is the innovation criteria is novelty, improvement, effective, and efficient. So there's a lot of field of study for hundreds of years that has been trying to understand how do we get more traditional innovation. But what we haven't been looking at is those that have social innovation criteria, which is about sustainable, just, and public value. And so if we want to understand those better, then we can apply those principles to new social innovations coming forward to do a couple things. Get more of them, get them to scale, and in particular, keep this in mind, because you'll see this throughout the talk, get to them to scale more quickly, because what we see is a huge time lag in social innovations that we don't necessarily see in traditional innovations. So that's what we're going to talk about. And again, so this slide highlights social innovation, social responsible investing. You can have traditional innovations that do good, like the internet, but you can also have innovations that lead to some pretty severe detriments, such as deep water trolling and, depending on how you play on this side, hydraulic fracking. Okay? So we're concerned about those that have a positive value to society. Okay. Now, that was number one. So hopefully you have a little bit of sense of what the definition of social innovation is. Now I'm going to jump in to the case study. And all the case studies we looked at, they go through this 4 phases. First, you have a problem, or what we would say you have an opportunity. Then you go through idea generation. That's stage 1. Then you go through piloting and prototyping. And hopefully you get to diffusion and scaling. The fact is very few get to the last part, but those that we studied had made it through that innovation continuum, and it gives a good way to dig deeper into the understanding of that social innovation. Okay, microfinance. How many people in the room are familiar with the concept? Okay, good. So that's the majority of the hands. So what microfinance? The problem was lack of formal credit and financing and a lack of a formal financial sector for the poor, both urban and rural, okay? And many of you are now familiar with where it's gotten to today. It's around the world, it's expanded. And I know before we started doing this research, I had a perceived idea of where it came from. And part of that is true, Muhammad Yunus. But if we take a step back and really look at the history of microfinance, I think we find some new things. So let's start with idea generation. Because the fact of the matter is savings and credit institutions have been operating around the world for 1,000 years prior to 1950. You had chit funds in India, group savings. You had mujins in Japan, which were trade associations that had gathered to do informal credits and loan. And you had isuzus in Nigeria. And those happened, so the chit funds were around, 1,000, mujins were around 1,300, and suzus were around 1,500. So around the world, you had this idea of informal credit. Then in the 1800s, primarily in Europe, you had this idea of savings club and people's bank. So that whole cooperative movement actually started to take hold in some of these more urban areas in Europe. Third piece, now we finally get to the 1950s and 60s, is you had subsidized rural credit. So you now had government come in and realize, oh, we need to get credit to the poor, and their model, not sure they talked to the customers at this time, was let's give them subsidized rates and we're just going to focus on agriculture. So the idea generation stage kind of looked like this. There were actually little ideas operating around the world. Some were big flowers, some were little, and you had these little bees that were people actually delivering on these social innovations. And the third piece, it was global in nature. Okay, so that's the idea generation stage. So what happens when we get to the 1960s, Mohamed Yunus and also Acción in Venezuela started these ideas and had looked around, seen what had operated before, and focused a particular model. And what they did in this new model was they targeted poor women. So they narrowed the focus. They then had this new idea, well, if we're going to do credit, they need to be able to pay it back, right? Doesn't that make sense? And so they focused on micro business. So again, there were these ideas that existed prior to this, and it was an adaptation pulled from across many things. And then the third is they added in group lending. So that kind of blossoms in the 60s and 70s. The other piece that happened during this time is there was a backlash against these government systems for the rural poor, which was actually a good thing, because those programs didn't work, they had to be subsidized, and they didn't have the payback amounts that were viable in microfinance. And the key, I think, the difference as we look at these two, one was driven from the top without really talking to customers, where microfinance was driven from the customer's ideas, their needs, and their ability to help design their own programs. So this is really then what the piloting and prototyping stage looked like. These good ideas that really worked started to come together and become big flowers. And there were more bees piloting these things around the world. But we took what we learned and adapted, iterated, and grew the ones that were working based on listening to the customer and bringing new partners in. So now let's get to diffusion and scaling. What we have in the 1990s was the microfinance decade. What made the difference at this stage was the infusion of private capital. Okay? So the early stages of microfinance were primarily driven from NGOs doing amazing work. But the realization came, you're never going to get to scale unless you bring in for-profit private capital. Then into the early 2000s, you had the rise of non-banked financial institutions, which were for-profit entities around microfinance. Okay? So the players over time changed. And when we really look at what it took to get to scale, it included civil society, it included good regulation. And if we look at a country-by-country basis, those countries that set in good policy made a huge difference to grow microfinance. Let me just give one example. In India, the government took a lead effort in 1999 to bring together the NGOs doing microfinance with traditional banks. So in 1999, there was access to around 33,000 banks. By 2004, because of this government effort, that number was up to 1 million. So this way of cross-sector working differently together, bringing in government, bringing in civil society, and bringing in business is actually what allowed microfinance to scale and to have 2005 declared the year of microcredit, and Mohamed Yunus winning the Nobel Prize. So that's what it looks like to get microfinance to scale. Private capital, business operating in a way that's engaging with civil society, government engaging, setting good policy, and civil society holding on to its mission to alleviate poverty and holding on to knowing that they're the ones who have access to customers and they're the ones who are ensuring this entire group is actually listening to the customers. Okay, so today there's 12,000 MFIs, 94 million borrowers in 91 countries. So a good social innovation, and I'm not gonna, we know there's been challenges, but everything we do in life, there's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So I'm not gonna delve into that, but that would be another conversation. So now let's look at the role of technology. And we're gonna start off with microfinance. So you'll see
for those of you a little bit more familiar in the room, it's a broad range of people engaged now in the field that includes technology, includes social media. But what I want to do is highlight one example. Okay? When we looked at the role of technology, there were kind of three things that it enabled microfinance to do. One, improve data and metrics in a very cost-effective way. Increase organizational efficiency. Okay? The lower the cost across big microfinance institution, that just means more money going to customers. And third is, wow, we have all, you think of the past of the 1990s, where to get a loan, you had to send the loan officer out into these rural towns that sometimes only had 2 or 3 borrowers. That's a pretty expensive proposition. So the one that I'm going to highlight today is the story of M-Pesa. How many people in the room are familiar with M-Pesa? Okay, fewer. Okay, that's actually a good thing. So what was happening in 2005, 2003, 4, 5, similar to go back to microfinance, there were these little ideas populating around the world. I'm going to focus on the ones in Africa. So in Ghana and Botswana, what people were actually doing is selling their phone credit for money. And it was just an interesting way of a new idea to be able to get cash. You know, mobile phones were having huge penetration. So there was this new tool and this new way of getting money. So a couple of things happened in 2005. Department for International Development, which is out of the UK, had this idea. Well, it's really expensive to get these payments from microfinance in these areas. Can we use, oh, where'd my phone go? Okay. Can we use this phone? Can we use this phone for payments? That we can use mobile banking to get our payments back for microfinance. Well, the DFID, actually being a very smart government agency, which I think it is, said, we have no idea how to do this. So they approached Vodafone in Kenya and said, what about piloting this in Kenya? Vodafone said, yes, that's an interesting idea. They went to safari.com and said, we have this idea, do you want to pilot it with us? So one of the things that's interesting about this technology effort is it was cross-sector from the outset. So all these people got into the room, they got their ideas together, and they agreed to pilot this effort. So the first thing that they did is, again, what I want to keep in mind is they started the idea of microfinance repayment. What started happening is they realized what people were doing is sending money between one another and sending money home. So often that was in the rural, getting urban areas, people making money, trying to get their money back home to their villages. So what was important at this is the people at Vodafone and Safari.com listened to the customer. They didn't say, now this is about microfinance. They said, this is about a new way for people to get money and access. So what happened next is they had a critical aha moment. One of the mistakes I think we see with technology a lot at the Center for Social Innovation, people forget that there's a person behind every piece of technology. And what I'm fond of saying, awareness is easy, behavior change is hard. So if you can really listen to your customer and understand their needs and build around those needs, that's what's going to get you to success. I'm not kidding. I see every young student coming in with a new app that's going to save the world, and I'm like, well, have you tried it with a customer? And well, we'll get there. So, but this is an example with M-Pesa, is they did listen to the customer, and then they took a big leap. Because what they realized, they could no longer rely on the technology. They had to build a network of agents with places on the ground for people to actually get cash. Okay? So they did. So that was a big change. So they changed their business model, and then they set a really bold goal that they'd serve 1 million customers, and everybody thought they were crazy. So then what happened? They reached 1 million customers, and it became viral. okay? And let me walk through these 5 really important things they did. And whether you're a nonprofit, you're a business, or government, you got to get the model right. You've got to get the operating platform working well, and that's what they did. So they built this network so people could get cash. They built a strong brand. Back to the point, just because marketing is a business idea doesn't mean it's a bad idea. Sometimes disenfranchised populations, they should be able to choose what they want to do, and branding can play a role. The other thing they did is it worked all the time. They put a lot of emphasis on infrastructure, and then they trained their people. Again, technology was the enabling tool. It was the people, the network, and meeting the customer needs that led it to success. And then the fourth they talk about is they combated fraud. So where is M-Pesa today? It moves $500 to $700 million per month through the phones. It took out the banks. And the reason it was able to take out the banks is because the mobile phone operators didn't need to make money, but could get it to scale. 15 million active users. So that is a great success story of technology driving social innovation. But there's a little bit of pause for that too. So, as you would expect, everyone deserves this, and that's a good thing. So they launched it in Tanzania. They've tried to do replication efforts in Tanzania, Afghanistan, South Africa, and India. And so think of this. Tanzania, I've been to Kenya. They're close to one another. There's a lot of similarities. Didn't go over well in Tanzania. What they thought is, oh, we can just replicate the same model. That didn't work. They're on version 2, still trying to work it out. What's interesting, in Afghanistan, they did a fundamentally different model with the technology really relying on government to get paychecks to people that used to have to, be delivered by hand. And a bit of a surprise, the people getting paid, like the policemen in Afghanistan, their paychecks went up 40% because corruption was taken out of the equation. So they didn't replicate what Kenya did. They took the tool, they took the model, and they adapted it to their culture, their context, and their needs. Okay, so that's the story of M-Pesa. We've got our definition of social innovation. We've looked at microfinance and hopefully trying to understand the different sectors that came together, the time frame that it took, and then we looked at technology. So I'm going to wrap up today, hopefully in the next 4-ish minutes, I might go 2 minutes over, is what are the lessons learned around social innovations that can apply to what you're doing today, what you're going to do tomorrow. First and foremost, you've got to commit to cross-sector collaboration. Social innovations to get to scale require everybody's involvement. So let's take climate change. Really? There is no way we're going to address climate change unless we get business on board, we get civil society on board, we get local government, we get federal government, and we get those governments working across continents. So that applies on a macro scale, and it applied also on these small social innovations. I don't think there's any way M-Pesa would have been as successful as it was if just one of the players would have tried to do it on their own. Diffit had a long standing and reputation. They understood deep customer work. They understood poverty. Vodafone knew a little about mobile phones, and Safari.com was willing to take the risk and build a new model because you know what? Business is really good at doing that. So whether it's at the macro scale or kind of these smaller scales, at some point, cross-sector collaboration is key. Second, focus on your strategic lever. We all know this in our daily lives. It follows the Pareto principle. 80% of our effect is from 20% of our cause. There's things we do in running your business or running your NGO that matter more than the others. We all have a list of 10 things. I have my 10. The key is what are the top 2 or 3 that are going to make a difference. And that same principle applies to social innovations. So let's look at just fair trade. Fair trade started in 1949 with the Church of the Brethren to do arts and crafts and provide a fair wage. And it existed for 50, 60 years. In small stores doing great work. But it really wasn't able to get to scale until they got mainstream markets to believe in its value. So they got Starbucks, Walmart, Dunkin' Donuts to believe in fair trade. And you know what that ended up? Getting more money to coffee farmers around the world. Okay, so what they realized is they had the roots of a good model, but to get to scale, that was their strategic lever. For M-Pesa, they did two things. One is they were really smart and realized there's a person behind that technology. They didn't think it was just one. They really married those two differently together. And the second piece they did was, as I pointed out earlier, is they built the network to support the technology. Real agents in real areas being able to deliver cash to those people in need. So the third one, and this is the unfortunate one that I know people don't necessarily want to hear, is never mistake a clear view for a short distance. You may know where you're going and you can see it clearly and you want it to happen in the next year or maybe the next 2 years. But when we studied these social innovations, they all went through this process of hitting what we call the stagnation chasm. We have an appetite, and I think it is worse in Silicon Valley than everywhere else. We want new, we want sexy. But unfortunately, sexy doesn't always get us to scale. Sometimes the idea generation's the easy part. Then everyone's still pretty excited when you're piloting and prototyping. But what we found over and over, once you've then actually figured out your model and you need millions of dollars to get to the next stage, it's not there. So these innovations fall into this stagnation chasm for a variety of reasons. And I would say the success of M-Pesa kind of is reaching this right now. It was successful on a country level, but getting it to a global level, they're not adapting to their customers' needs as quickly as they need to be. So we really need, if you're a corporation in the room, you need to think of the longer term for social innovation. If you're a funder in the room, you've got to think about once an idea actually gets to that stage of looking at a much longer time frame and looking at a different financial investment to get that to diffusion and scaling. So, as I mentioned, what worked in Kenya didn't necessarily work in South Africa. Okay, my last 3 slides, because this keeps flashing, my time's up, but I said 2 more minutes. So what can civil society do? They're a key player in driving social innovations. They've got trust, they've got networks, and deep customer knowledge, and that is irreplaceable. And most governments and most businesses don't have that. So they've got to really think of their assets and what they're bringing to the table. They, in these collaborative efforts, need to ensure the customer's voice is being heard. And then they're the ones, I do think, who can provide more of this long-term thinking in these collaborative efforts. Because they've been doing this work for a long time. They know what it takes. What can government do? Set effective policy, regulation, and rules. Government has to be part of the solution. And we've seen over and over again when it can make things go much quicker, much better, and faster, and when it becomes a barrier. Secondly, they provide access to reach to large number of customers and data, and sometimes if in the United States, to Brazil, to the Middle East, if we can figure out how to tap that information for social good, we'll likely be able to drive social innovations forward. The third thing they can do is raise awareness. In the United States, they've done a great job around energy use. You know, before you just got the bill. Now they send you what you're using, and they've piloted some tests to show you how you compare to your neighbors. So if you're an excessive energy user, we all know that peer pressure works. So those are kind of small, innovative things that government can do that can change behavior that the rest of us don't have access to. And then lastly, what can business do? Business is good about efficiencies. They've got access to resources. They've got these amazing supply chains that if they're partnered with the right ideas, the right civil society, they can leverage those assets for social good. And we've got a number of examples of Unilever and even some Walmart doing things around farming and agriculture when they leverage what they already know for social good. They're good at rapid action. And so to get over that continuum, sometimes you've got to be able to move things forward, let the things that fail, let it go. So we can learn from business to have more rapid action. And then, as I mentioned lastly, providing flexible funds. My experience is we'll rarely, if ever, get government to provide flexible funds to drive innovation. They're going to provide more of the restricted funding around scale, and that's good. But business has the opportunity that they all talk about innovation. They need to deliver innovation and how they're giving out grants and working with the civil society. So those are 3 roles that I think are important because we have this new way we've got to work together if we want to solve the world's social problems. So in wrapping up, we think Bill Clinton did a good job back in the United States, and we think he's done a good job with the Clinton Foundation. And so I think, as he states, if we want to build a stronger, more sustainable world for future generations, one with more partners and fewer enemies, we have to really work together. So whether you're a business in the room, you're from civil society, you're from government, you're a stay-at-home mom, stay-at-home dad, I encourage everyone to use those 3 levers to think about driving social innovations forward, because I fundamentally believe we can solve the world's global problems. The solutions are out there, they're waiting to be found, and they're waiting for us to act and deliver on those opportunities. Thank you.
Bom, gente, agora nós vamos começar.
Now we're going to start our questions and answer session. The idea now is to work as an aquarium. So just reminding you what the process is, like these chairs are empty now and they're waiting for you. So the idea is that you come up on stage, you introduce yourself very briefly, you make the question that you want to make to Kriss, or make a comment or any remark, or participate in any way in this debate. You can feel free. Kriss has the simultaneous translation, so you can make your questions in Portuguese, in our language. There's no problem. This language barrier is not going to be a barrier that restricts you from coming up here. I'm going to make the first question to heat up this debate while you decide who's going to come here first and second and third. So I'm going to make the question that is here. It is in the organization and the orientation of this social good seminar and the social good seminar in the whole world. Kriss, what is the technology? What is the effort, and what is the idea? What do we need to invest now in order to get the world that we want in 2030?
So I think the important piece to remember is the individual behind the technology. So I think there are existing technologies that we have the opportunity to leverage for more positive social change. In the United States, we seem to have an obsession about cat videos. But can't we use YouTube to drive more social change? Okay, this is hard to do. I'm going to take it off. Sorry. When I speak, I'll take it off, put it back on. So there are existing technologies. So I think the opportunity is on the individual level. What we do with our time every day, how we interact with technology, we have individual choices of what we want to do. And that behavior of the individual influences our peers. Our peers influence a larger field. So it doesn't always have to be that we are creating more and more new technologies. One is leveraging some of the existing technologies for social good and social innovation in a more proactive way, I think is one piece. Then secondly, I do think where big changes will come around disruption are things like, again, what mobile phones have demonstrated. In particular cases, they've gotten rid of banking industries in some. And I'm not a visionary enough to guess what would be, that next social innovation. I can guarantee if Twitter had come to me to invest in as a technology, I would have said no. So there's smarter people, in the world that will know what those new technologies are going to be. But I feel confident the more we're educating our young people, the more we're educating everybody to use technology more effectively to drive change.
Very well. We have two gentlemen here. So ladies, you can come up on stage. You're not going to leave me alone here, the only woman. So I'm calling you. But the two gentlemen are very welcome. Please introduce yourselves and make your comment. I'm Márcio from the Alvina Foundation. My question, Kriss, is about a huge amount of contests of applications and technologies that we see happening, at least from 2 years from now, hackers, marathons, data boot camps, challenges. Social Good Brazil is organizing a lab process. I'm part of the foundation that is doing the civic funding. So there are dozens or hundreds, if we consider the United States, of initiatives like this. So what would you recommend for all of these organizations that are involved in these contests so that they can really leverage the outcomes? So two recommendations maybe for who organizes technology contests so that they can perform all these issues you talked about and how they can leverage this.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. I think the contest, the technologies, the incubators, the labs, the salons, they play a role in driving innovation, but they're not sufficient in the long term. So what I would say for anyone moving into that area, you as an organization need to think much more long term than just finding those ideas. And I think it's easier to find the ideas than it is to figure out how to execute on those ideas. So that would be one recommendation. Realize your limitation by doing, if you're only doing that piece. Because I think then the opportunity comes on in those convenings to think long term and then bring different partners in at these later stages. Because we see it at Stanford all the time. I have a Social Innovation Fellows program. We've got a venture studio. It's once they're past that idea stage and that piloting and prototyping, if I can bring the right business partners in, different investors in, that idea is much more likely to get proven out in an effective way. So I would encourage those who are investing in these new ideas to think, oh, if I'm going to invest in this incubator, I'm in it for at least 5 years, if not 10. Don't think I'm just the initial funder, because that's not sufficient. So I would say those two things is, one, realize its limitation, and then set your design to be longer term from inception. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Joseira. I am from Social of Verdade. Me and my friends have a social network, which is to help people and institutions. On the one side, the donators, and on the other side, the institutions. When I created this with my friends, we started with a few people, and everybody thought the idea was interesting, but one single person told me that she thought it was more interesting and more effective to help something on their own side. And he gave the example that when he helped the son of his maid, his cleaning person in his house. So this is a fantastic interaction, but there is a cold side to the social medias. So I ask you, you think that this cold side is a setback, to leverage this unity, these donations, this support? And second, how do you measure the result that the social media bring effectively? That is, for who needs the help, the support, for the person that needs assistance. How do you measure this?
If I understand the question correctly, is you're an organization about matching donors to civil society and NGOs. And then you had the example of an individual who said, I don't want to do that because I just give to... Okay. I fall into that same category. I think let's not pretend in your brain, the same release, the part of the brain that is through giving is the same thing that's motivated through like sex and drugs and rock and roll. So giving has an emotional piece to it, and it always will. And what I personally, and I know a lot of my friends do, is we do both. So one is I want to invest in good organizations that I have confidence in their leadership, I have confidence in the quality of the programs that they deliver, and so a part of my donations goes towards that. But I similarly, if a friend asks me to do something, it's about relationships, and there's individuals in my life that have come on hard times that I'm going to give to them. So I don't think it's an either or, and all the data in the world will not take out the emotional piece of philanthropy. So what I would respond to your friend is that is a good thing, and if that's all he can do right now, he should consider that. But giving back to the community in a broader way is what's going to build kind of the larger civil society and get us, more to a just, sustainable, and prosperous world. So I don't think it's an either or. Thank you.
Obrigado. Well, let's go move over to this side. You guys have a mic. I can lend you my microphone. Good morning. My name is Marcelo. I work with project management in a technology company. And first of all, I would like to say that it was a great opportunity to hear your presentation. I watched it in the audience, and we have many ideas. We get many insights and positives how to affect change in our daily life, in our future projects, and how to develop these ideas that you said. And my greatest concern, I'm reading about social revolution in Brazil for the last 20 years, and my greatest concern is a little bit of our literature and our encounters. It separates the civil society as a whole, and the companies and the government. And this is almost antagonical to the ideas. You said that social revolution and gathering companies as you were betraying a movement. So one of the things that I realized, especially coming out from the literature of the American NGOs, the ideas that you put forth of social revolution is to use all of this to affect change, to use government, to companies, and the idea that this is a little bit bad in the sense of that people perceive it, because how can she talk about social revolution talking about business also? This doesn't make a lot of sense. So that is why it is so difficult to get into the sectors in Brazil, because this is a really revolutionary idea. And I would like if you could give us an insight from your experience to tell us how can we really comprehend this movement to gather everybody and to consider the civil society, governments, companies, so we can really affect a social change and revolution. We have this issue of a fragmented culture in Brazil. We have a very political instability, so I want to hear your thoughts.
That's a great question. And I would say, since I've been here, that has been a common theme of the antagonism and fighting between sectors here. So what I would argue is we can learn from the past, but we're living in a different environment today. And the fact of the matter is, business is too big to not be part of the solution. So we either need to figure out how to make it part, or I do believe it's a lost cause. So my recommendations with that are, the writing is on the wall, so we've got to figure out how to work with that. The second piece that I would say is, don't throw all business into the same category. There's good businesses and there's bad businesses. And so when you're coming from a more antagonistic environment, try to find an early win. So don't go to the most evil business. Leave that for the real activists to force on. But when it comes to partnerships, I've got to believe there's some great companies here that are trying to do things differently. So what you try to do is find those early wins with those companies that we call early adopters, early majority, who are more likely to want to work together, to be, adapt. And what we have found, kind of looking at the case studies, is that's important that the business is in a mode to try to transition, and it then becomes dependent on finding the right person or people that are going to stick in it for the long haul, because in the end, it's the people that are making the relationships and making the new collaborations. So I would recommend, and then once you get 10 of those examples, those businesses, then let them push the bad businesses over to the more positive side. And I come from, so I've worked in the corporate sector, I've worked at a nonprofit, I've worked in social enterprise, I've worked in philanthropy, and I've worked in academia. So I haven't worked in government, that's my next one. But I've been, my early years were much more in an activist model with runaway and homeless youth and more of that intensity. So I know what it's like, and I think we as the activists have a role to play to open up and treat everyone as an individual and treat the companies as an individual, and let them prove their worth or not worth. But don't go in presuming that they're bad or equal or evil. So I think we have a role to play there, and I think then for the businesses, the role that they need to play is to really adapt. If they want to do good, their business model has to change to focus on the long term. And over time, we've seen examples of businesses doing really innovative, creative things, working with civil society. So it does sound like it's a harder current existing environment, and that's why every country, how it drives social innovation is going to be unique to the culture and the context right now. So I would recommend starting with a few businesses where you can get some early successes and work 1 at a time, 10 at a time, 20 at a time. Thank you.
Folks, we have a small issue. The time here doesn't quit. This clock makes us nervous. I will recommend the following, that both of you make your comments, ask your questions together, so she can comment once, and both of you, and unfortunately we will have to close the debate. There's lunch. We have another type of integration that we can offer you, but and she will be here during lunch. She's open for dialogue during the afternoon. So we will have many moments, opportunities, but the debate has to quit here so the event can carry on. So please. Good morning, Kriss. Thank you very much, first of all, for the great seminar. It's very enriching. I'm Pedro. I'm a law student of the Federal University of Minas Gerais. And my question is similar to the one that was asked before. When you are in an academic environment, probably Stanford is the same way, there are divisions in the civil society or the academic society, and sometimes people want to reach the same goal, the same objective, to bring about good for society or the institution, but they have differences, political or any kind, and they are not willing to conciliate to reach the common goal. So they have differences, and how to deal in the aspects to bring people together to accomplish the same goal. How do you deal with these differences that sometimes it's in their very roots, and they are predisposed to having those differences? Civil society also has divisions in itself, so how do we gather people with all those differences? Well, good morning. My name is Anna. I work in Akaya Institute, and my question is related to education. I have two questions, actually. First of all, objectively, the students are from the 21st century and the institutions from the 20th century. How do you work around this? In Brazil, 80% of the enrollments are from the public sector. So this involves a network. There's the state, so besides having the 21st century and the 20th century teachers, we have the state involved. So my question is, what strategies would you recommend to deal with this reality?
Whoa. Good luck. So I'm going to go in reverse order. So let me start with the education one. And I think for the most part, that exists in the United States. It's the desk, the teacher up front, lack of use of technology in the classroom. And there isn't one person I know who wants to work with our Department of Education either. It's a pretty stale entity. What we found successful, I would say it starts two ways in education. One is we've got to realize students learn more out of school these days often than they're learning in school. They're spending a lot of time online, in games, and those types of things. So we have seen innovations come forward that are supplemental to school. So I think that's one strategy. It's not the big goal, but sometimes doing that, you can slowly infuse into school examples, whether it be you set up an after-school program. So you don't have to follow the policies, but you connect it to the school, and you can start to infuse new norms and ways of working in that after-school model. And we've seen successes in our low-income communities, in particular working with parents in this after-school model that have then infused getting them much more engaged in their teacher conferences and things like that. I think the second thing we've seen, and we have a couple examples, like a Teach for America, is bringing in innovation from the outside into the public sector. So this is a nonprofit organization that takes graduating students from big schools, Harvard, MIT, Stanford, and they commit to teach in a low-resourced public institution for 2 years. So in that case, they're training them on innovation, they become the example, and you're bringing to the school a free resource. So you're not asking them, you're giving them an asset that, again, can be the example. So I think those are kind of what we call the low-hanging fruit. Eventually, where we've seen innovation happen is either at our regional level, and then I wouldn't say much at our federal level has been successful, but we do have examples in different states in the United States, or each of ours is set up into regions. So I encourage on the policy level, start small, start local, and work your way up. We just haven't seen many examples from the top down actually working. But if one school district that's next to the other, one is trying something innovative and their test scores are going up, the other people are going to start paying attention. So we find that's the best way to start. For the question that is similar to the previous one about how do we get past those biases, I think one way to be concrete about it is when you're setting up these collaborative efforts is by design to bring in a neutral party. Okay, so that if you're an NGO and you're going to do a partnership with a business or you're trying to do something, that you bring in kind of that neutral facilitator that allows people to get their views. So it's a little bit more expensive from a resource standpoint, but at that initial stage, trust needs to be built. And so sometimes you need that neutral person, that neutral agency that's working across those sectors. And so that's one that's a real kind of prescriptive model. And then I think, which I alluded to before, is there's no global solution. It's one project at a time, unfortunately. And I think how we're educating our young people can matter. I would say what we're trying to do at Stanford is what we call is educate a new breed of leaders that we call bridgers. So we encourage all of our, you should work in the nonprofit sector, you should work in business, and you should work in government. Like, that's the career of the future, is where you're able to work across those sectors. So even at a mindset shift, and we're finding the younger generation a little bit more flexible in that way. So I wish I had the easier solution, but I don't.
I'm going to break the protocol and I'm going to answer your question too, because I think it is a very relevant question that you just made. I think there's two things that are very important. How you change diversity, how you use diversity in favor of an idea. Because in a way that it was said, it only raises the negative side of diversity, what divides us. But if we believe that the solutions are together, you need diversity at the table. You need diverse people. So that's the strength of the common purpose. This common purpose needs to be very discussed, because this is what going to take people to their best, what brings them together, because we're fighting for a common cause. Investing time in discussing the purpose and aligning this purpose and having very clear what is the common project that is uniting us here is probably one of the most relevant investments, so that diversity can work in favor of this and be one of the characteristics of our Brazilian characteristic that we like so much. But in the reality, it separates us more than unites us. In our reflection inside the foundation, we invest in discussing what we're doing together. It is a way of going beyond what separates us. So time is up. It's showing up here, so we need to wrap this up. We're going to have the two of you. I'm going to be as brief as possible. My name is Tiago. I am a student in a master's degree. I study social businesses, and one of the things that caught my attention in your lecture was the UNIS. You mentioned UNIS, and you talked about microcredit. And in this line of UNIS, I'm going to question you the role of the multinationals nowadays, the American reality, which is your reality in practice. How do you see this role of the multinationals socially impacting the innovation? Leaving the social accountability, the philanthropic social accountability, and going towards a more impactful reality, which is socially sustainable. I would like your opinion and some examples, maybe American examples you can give us. Thank you. Thank you, Kriss and Françoise. My name is Raul. I am from Turbo, an accelerator of sustainable business, and I'm also a part of the choice movement of university students involved in social movements. I would like to talk about university, which is something that I'm very dissatisfied with. The university model, the academic model in public Brazilian universities is very academic and theoretical. It goes very far from what you show of idea generation, prototyping, experimenting. So I would like to enjoy your presence here coming from Stanford. Where do you think the university model is going? How can we fulfill this transformation? Thank you.
That's a great question. So I'll answer. Oops. Let me answer the multinationals. And you didn't ask a specific question, but I do want to note. I think the emergence of social business is really positive, and how I frame social business are those that are doing a product or service that's deliberate about a social and environmental issue. And I think that needs to be a new piece of the puzzle. So I'm glad to be seeing that occurring also here. And in terms of multinationals, I'll reiterate what I said before. There's good and bad companies. There is nobody's perfect. So one of my, I think favorite companies probably that's US based is Patagonia, Yvon Chouinard, who has really always been at the forefront of trying to have business play a positive role in society. And he's always done things way ahead. So whether it was he was walking in a field and saw that there were no bees, and he said, you know what, I'm only doing organic cotton and it's going to increase my price 30%. I don't care. It's the right thing to do. And everyone thought he was crazy. Somehow he's still in business. His new model is based on us buying less. That's his new business model. We're buying too much. We all need to buy less. And everyone says it's not going to work. I actually think it will continue to build a great company. So that's, I would say, one unique example. I think then you have an example like a public company that has integrated it more into strategy, and I would use Nike as an example, that they're trying to drive innovation into product design and also in their whole recycling, their material use, reducing energy use in their supply chain, and that's where we need to get all companies to care about. So there are some companies trying to do some good things, but there's nobody that is necessarily picture perfect. And we have examples of social businesses coming out of Stanford. One is Delight, that sells LED lighting for the rural poor. Sam's a good friend of mine, was an old student. I'm sure if we looked at their supply chain, they've probably got some things that aren't perfect either. So what I think we need to look at as a society, that it's moving in the right direction. We're pushing the boundaries, but don't expect perfection. So I would say Patagonia's good, Nike's good. I think, Walmart has done some really interesting things on supply chain. I think, so there's other, and that would be an example of a company that's doing some really good things and then other things not well at all. But on their supply chain around reducing packaging, their energy fleets, working with farmers around tomatoes to use 50% less water, those are all really, positive efforts that businesses have made. To your question on universities, if you could figure out how to change the culture, it is a headache I live with. I'm not, it is very real that the institution, which when you think about it, how government has changed the past 500 years, how business has changed the past 500 years. Academia really hasn't changed in 500 years. It is so solid that it has some staying power. So I agree with you that its theory versus practice really needs to be pushed. I would say I'm at the Center for Social Innovation, and sometimes, I feel like I'm hitting my head against the wall. But I feel like if I don't do it, who else is going to? Because what students want is that their education apply to what's going on the ground. And so what I encourage every kind of university to do, I think setting up these types of centers is a great way to bring resources in to do unique things, and and alumni who can fund these things play a key role in that. So when the university is coming to you for pledges and so forth, give funding to what you care about and trying to push the university to be innovative. So I would say that has been a key role to the center being successful, is because our alumni and donors believe in doing things differently. So I think centers are one way to go active. The secondly is we have a lot of flexibility at the university for students to organize and do clubs on their own, and letting that, and what happens over time, that then becomes part of the culture. So I'm optimistic that there's changes in small ways across universities, and I see that globally. The overarching institution is a much bigger challenge that I don't have the answer for that, unfortunately.
Thank you for your questions, Kriss. Thank you so much. Thank you for your speech. Thank you for your inspiration. And thank you for your joy, because you're very joyful, and I think this is very important for us to be inspired by you and doing something different. A round of applause to her.